Hello and welcome to Your Broken Galaxy. I am Broken, and today I am going to go over 20 successor chapters, one for each of the Space Marine Legions. So originally I was planning on doing 20 very short videos where I detail one ridiculous successor chapter. However, almost nobody watched the 4 that I've put out so far, so I decided to do a poll and see what you guys would like. And it was unanimous. Everyone, at least at the time that I recorded this, everyone voted that I should just do one long video, and so that's what I'm gonna do. To be perfectly candid, I'm not the biggest fan of all of these. I think some of them are a lot better. I'll say that the 17th is the one that originally gave me the idea to do this. My favorite from this group are probably the 12th and the 15th, so we'll see what you guys think of those ones. If you want to just skip ahead to your favorite Legion, I would not feel at all disappointed about that. And if you guys like this kind of content on Warhammer, let me know. I do have a plan to do a similar video for Chaos Warbands, one for each. So let me know if you think that's a good idea. For anyone who's never been to my channel before, I almost always do Star Wars-based comedy, and that's what I probably will continue to focus on in the future, but I wanted to give this video a try. The First Legion, the Dark Angels, successor chapter, the Darker Angels. So the First Legion, of course, the Dark Angels, one of my favorites, and if I wasn't creating my own custom chapter, probably the chapter I'd be most likely to play. These guys are known as a knightly order because their Primarch, Tywin Lannister, is an absolute boss. When the Lion went home to Caliban, he came to find that his dear old dad had betrayed him, and his dad laid the smackdown on him so hard that he was down for a 10,000-year count. The Dark Angels went ballistic because of the traitors. They were, after all, horribly, horribly terrified, like tiny little schoolgirls, that if someone found out that their legion was half chaos, that the Emperor would give them the old 211. Anyway, this group split into a lot of successor chapters, and wouldn't you know of it, one of them was even more dark than the rest. They hated the traitors so much more than everyone else. They were even more knightly than the originals. You see, this chapter's founding chapter master wasn't just a knight. He was actually a squire that was utterly and totally infatuated with the Deathwing Knights. So when he was given his own chapter, he floored the gas pedal towards chivalry and revenge. It's been said that the Dark Angels will leave everything they are doing in order to find one of the fallen. Well, the Darker Angels, they do that even more so. They don't have to hear that there's a fallen on the planet. They just hear the word fallen, and they go postal, no witnesses. They were once having a state dinner with the leader of a planet that just submitted to Imperium rule, and the leader was like, "Let me show you around." And then the guy tripped and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I seem to have fallen." And the Darker Angels exterminated the entire planet. They also kind of go over the top on the heraldry side of things. First off, their colors are dark green and cream, just like the Dark Angels, but they only get green paint from the rarest of flowers on the top of the tallest mountain on a planet that is guarded by a dragon in the Imperium Nihilus. They look at the Dark Angels as though they are superstars, and as the Lion as though he is a gosh darn god. The Emperor doesn't even make them blink, though, because they are so fixated on living up to their dad's image. Their chapter motto is Angelus Obscuribus Angelus Sumus, which means we are darker angels than dark angels, and their battle cry is Knee. The Second Legion. Well, don't have much to say about the Legion, but the chapter is the Asian senior citizens who work out at the park at 6 a.m. Okay, hear me out. The Second Legion is big of an enigma, but I'm going to make my case why Asian senior citizens who exercise at the park at 6 a.m. is a good idea for a Space Marine chapter. After the Second was purged, he had just a whole bunch of Space Marines, and these guys were like, useful. So instead of erasing them, the Emperor decided that he was going to have their minds wiped. Now, these guys don't realize they're descended from the Second Legion. They think that they're some robot girly man's guys. But because of the massive psychic mind wipe, they ended up getting some pretty strange tendencies. One of those tendencies is to wake up at 5:30 a.m. and head to the park any time of the year, doesn't matter. They stand around for a few minutes and turn on a radio, and then they listen to the only recording left of the second Primarch that exists in the entire galaxy, and that recording was a 15-minute recitation of the Second Legion's morning workout routine. Once these guys are finished with their early morning workout, they're ready for the day. I tell you what, they are energized to shoot Xenos, to stomp out chaos. Most of them leave the park pretty quickly after they're done with their exercises, but a few stick around and do Tai Chi. Their preferred method of combat is mechanized infantry, where they use wave after wave of transport, but unfortunately they all drive so slow that they often miss the battles entirely. Their company colors are white, but their officers wear bland, oversized brown, dark blue, and gray armor. Their chapter motto is "Don't fix what's broke," and their greatest aim is to get to go to bed by 8 p.m. The Third Legion. The successor chapter? The Fancy Lads. The Fancy Lads are the most pretentious, most pompous, most fancy Space Marines in the Imperium. Before Fulgrim fell to chaos, these were the guys that were in charge of all the over-the-top etiquette that the Emperor's children had to do. They created incredibly detailed languages with thousands of words of vocabulary, grammar structures, and even punctuation that was based solely on how they set their forks and knives onto a plate to indicate whether they wanted seconds to a waiter without having to use their mouths to actually talk to the inferiors. Right? They have used incredible resources to shift the molten core of planets so as to make diamonds that are filled with other gems so they can embed them into their bolters. Their way of melee combat is so grandiose that in order to challenge someone to a duel, they have to smack their opponent in the face with the glove of a monarch of an extinct Xenos species. When they fight, they all use muzzle-loaded single-shot bolter pistols for two purposes. First, to make sure that they are not sullying the battlefield with droll excretion of rapid-fire weapons, and second, so that they can hold up a cup of tea made from the private stock of extinct leaves that were found in the gardens of those monarchs that they're stealing all the gloves from. Fulgrim actually found these guys so pompous and off-putting that he kicked them out of the Emperor's children before he even turned traitor. Not just because he didn't like them, but because he thought that them being loyal would cause such a pain to anyone they fight alongside of that they would be more useful alive. Their chapter colors are gold, white, and purple, and their chapter motto is a 15-hour opera that their chaplain sings to them before they go into war. The Fourth Legion, the Iron Warriors, gave birth to the Steel Warriors. Not gonna lie, I didn't look up the Steel Warriors before I did this. I am certain that there's some chapter out there called the Steel Warriors, but whatever. The Steel Warriors, being previously of the Iron Warriors, honestly just didn't like Perturabo, so they decided, screw this, and they left. He was going to hunt them down, but then he turned traitor, so the Steel Warriors found themselves in a bit of a tough spot. They decided that because steel was stronger than iron, that they'd call themselves the Steel Warriors, but they didn't realize that iron was basically not important in most Space Marine technology because, they use ceramite. So they decided that rather than being posers like the Iron Warriors or even the Iron Hands, that they were going to actually do something with steel. And that is when they found out that the only thing that uses steel in the 40th millennium is buildings. So they became fortifiers and builders of late 2K era buildings on backwater worlds. Their incredible strength lended itself very well to the tough work, and they were incredibly respected by the people of the worlds that they landed on. Their colors are red, white, and blue because half of the most powerful countries of the late 2K era where they got their building plans from used exactly those colors. Russia, France, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and probably some others. Their favorite melee weapons are welding torches, and their favorite ranged weapon is the mighty Riveter, which shoots rivets. Their chapter motto is build 'em high and build 'em hard. Unfortunately for the Steel Warriors, they were attacked by the Tau and killed to the last man. The Fifth Legion. The White Scars paragons of speed warfare, were a great legion, but sometime in the 37th millennium, a small group of them got separated from the rest on a little planet named Shul. While they were there, all of their motorcycles ended up breaking down. Being completely unable to repair their bikes, they were blessed to find an STC with an intact model of a bicycle. And so the lone tech marine that was with the stranded White Scars went about crafting giant bicycles with which the Marines could propel themselves into battle upon. And so the small group of 6 Marines, including a lieutenant named Spike, a sergeant named Bud, the tech marine Goggles, and 3 other guys that just kind of stood in the back, would patrol the planet, constantly collecting Imperial ties from the school children of the world. In time, despite Goggles' best efforts, all of their armor failed, and so the Space Marines ended up wearing the local garb: denim shorts, short-sleeve, untucked polo shirts, and baseball caps. Eventually, an uprising on the world started to take place. Odd-looking kids that they had once bullied started trying to attack them. The tiny chapter of 6 Marines would grab their weird-looking kids and shove their heads into toilets, flushing them and laughing. But then the dorky kids were just too much for them. Eventually, Bud suggested that these smelly, weird-looking kids may be gene stealers, to which one of the background no-name Marines says, "I'm not letting them take my shorts." After a long-fought battle, Spike realized that nothing could be done, and the world was lost. The Marines were able to go to one of the cities where there was an exterminatus device called the Atomic Wedgie, and they activated it, destroying the entire planet and defeating the Hive Fleet, thereby saving the next world in line for attack. They are the unknown heroes of the Imperium. The 6th Legion. Leman Russ had many sons, and many of these sons turned into wolves, their ferocity and strength unmatched on the battlefield. However, not every one of them had such a disposition. In fact, there were several of them, roughly 1,000, that turned into wonderful, wonderful dogs. These guys were as loyal and carefree as any of the dogs that mankind has come to know and love over the years. Domesticated, quiet, but also horribly protective of their friends. Leman knew that they were not best suited for the kind of harsh raids and assaults that his wolves would regularly get up to, but they were just so precious that he couldn't get rid of them. He dubbed them the Good Boys, and when the Legion split, this group turned into their own chapter. The Good Boys are known for always coming when they are called, they have infectious smiles, and they are content to just lie at the foot of the bed, protective and patiently, when their friends are sleeping. Their favorite type of warfare is anything where they can ride in a transport with their heads hanging out of the window, and their battle cry is, "I'm a good boy." When Malkador died on the Golden Throne, the Emperor sent out a silent, psychic message to the leader of the Good Boys, telling them that they were now the Emperor of Man's best friend. The 7th Legion was ruled by Rogaldorn, who adamantly wanted to keep his legion intact. However, once he finally agreed to follow Robot Girly Man's plan to split up the legion into chapters, one of the first and strongest chapters to be formed was the Imperial Feet. Clad in jet black armor with yellow trim, these brave soldiers were fortunate to find a partially intact STC, which had the schematics for a power foot. Yes, instead of the power fist worn by so many a Space Marine captain, the leaders of the Imperial Feet wear a massive, oversized, enormous mechanical foot on their power armor and engage in foot-based melee combat. Their chapter master Dogel Rorn, known as the silliest man out of all of the Sons of Dorns, was once asked by a member of the Sisters of Silence, "Hey, the whole Imperial Feet thing is a joke, right?" To which he said, "Nay, we are the Emperor's feet. Kick the heretic, stomp the alien, trample the mutant." To which the sister said, "You're not very bright, are you?" Unlike their parent legion, the Imperial Feet do not engage in fortifying. They have instead devoted themselves to fortress assault and have become the Imperium's best force for literally kicking down the door of the enemy. However, that isn't actually saying that much, since most other Imperial factions tend to use explosives and such to knock down doors. Their iconography is that of a single glorious glowing foot, the foot of the Emperor himself. The sound of their marching is feared by their enemies throughout the galaxy. The 8th Legion. The only reason that these guys are not considered a traitor chapter is because they are in the fringes of the Empire. These guys were originally part of the Night Lords, and as you may be aware, the Night Lords' method of conquering a planet was to roll up, gather all the societal leaders, governors, kings, presidents, senators, congressmen, judges, celebrities, and also all of their families, and then brutally murder them on the live local news. The idea was that this would make everyone so terrified that the same thing would happen to them that they wouldn't resist. Well, the preemptive attack took this to the next level. Specifically, what they do is go in and kill the leaders of people on imperial worlds in order to try and make them more loyal. They're like, look, we know those last guys that we just killed were super loyal to us, but you guys have to be even more loyal. If not, we're just going to come back in 100 years and do this little song and dance again. It's absolutely terrifying for everyone involved. Their idea is that they are preemptively deterring rebellion, which is why they have taken the bold moniker of the preemptive attack. Their favorite weapon is a man's single-bladed razor with which they will execute untold travesties on their victims. Their chapter motto is, "They won't see us coming," and their colors are Jacaro orange and Lothorn blue. I mean, you guys know eventually I had to actually use GW colors, right? The Ninth Legion. So the Blood Angels are, as every fan knows, space vampires, and as such, one day a group of Blood Angels were on a world they had recently conquered, and on it they found an incredibly old museum, and in this museum was a media display dating back tens of thousands of years. The Blood Angels watched what was called a movie about a group of people called vampires. The name of the movie was Twilight, and once the movie ended, they watched another, and another, and another. If there was a fourth movie, I'm not actually sure, and I'm unwilling to check. And these Blood Angels were taken aback. They were utterly disgusted with themselves because they didn't realize the greatness to which they could aspire as space vampires. They chose to immediately dedicate themselves to the techniques of Edward and Bella, and in time, when the chapter needed to split, a faithful group of battle brothers founded the Cullens. Each Marine practiced for hours to have the same awkward cadence in their speech. They searched for world after world for an ointment that would cause their skin to sparkle in the sun. They decided that they should have a low-key rivalry with the Space Wolves, and eventually they were all horribly killed by some orcs because they were busy modeling themselves after a horrible B-grade movie vampire. It's grimdark, guys. Not everybody's going to survive this thing. The 10th Legion. The Iron Hands, originally led by a guy named Iron Hands, is known for having hands which are in fact not made of iron. Because of course, iron isn't the best metal for making hands out of. It's rusty, dusty, and not nearly as strong as what the Iron Hands' actual hands are made of. These guys are known for constantly tinkering with their own bodies by chopping off bits and replacing them with machine parts. Not that this is especially unique in the far-flung future, though. But a small group of Iron Hands guys didn't want to constantly upgrade themselves. Instead, they found an STC which records all sorts of important information about late 2K era media technology, and they set about mastering this ancient art. They found the chapter the AV Club. So the audio-visual boys of the AV Club often will search through newly conquered worlds for ancient media technology and try to learn more and more. They created announcement for their fleet-based chapters, CCTV, because they had all the information on the STC, and it's not considered tech heresy since that's how they found it. Once they even helped a group of super over-dramatic Blood Angels relax and unwind with a movie marathon after they conquered a world. Their colors are dark brown and dark gray, and most of the time other Space Marines kind of ignore them, specifically when they were calling for help during a Necron invasion that led to all of them except 4 of their Marines getting slaughtered. But those 4 Marines decided that they were going to form the best ever news team in their sector. And they did. The 11th Legion. These guys just freaking love puppets. Like, not puppeting world leaders to bend to their will. They actually legitimately love puppets. They even make little bolters for the puppets so that when they are running into battle, they can be holding the puppets and having the puppets fire at their enemies. They also obviously love puppet shows, and every single Marine squad is expected to perform rite practice an entirely new 1-hour puppet show every single month. And these puppet shows, let me tell you, every Marine watches every puppet show. Do you know how many squads there are in a chapter? There are 100 squads, and each squad performs a 1-hour puppet show at the end of every month. Do you know how many hours there are in a week? 168. And that last week of the month, there is literally back-to-back 100 puppet shows for 100 hours. Not only are there 100 new puppet shows that each squad is performing, but they also watch a few dozen puppet shows throughout the rest of the month from previous performances that were particularly well received. They usually take at least a solid 50-hour work week to write their hour-long puppet show at the beginning of each month, and then the next 2 weeks they spend another 40 hours rehearsing their new puppet show. In a standard 4-week cycle, they are spending nearly 350 hours on puppet-centric activity. And what does the rest of the galaxy think of these guys? The rest of the galaxy thinks they are absolutely crazy, except for the Necrons. Nobody knew it, but back before the Necrons were Egyptian space terminators and they were all terminally ill cancer patients, the least ill of them would perform puppet shows to cheer up the ones closest to death. So the Necrons actually think these guys are all right, but everybody else just thinks they're crazy. The 12th Legion, or the World Eaters, are of course the legion of Angron the Unbeaten, known for being a very angry lad and a champion of the arena. During the Horus Heresy, Angron gathered up his boys and cut a promo saying, "Alright guys, here's the deal. My father has been the worst. He uses us and abuses us, and I'm not going to take it anymore. You know what I'm going to do is challenge him, and we'll see who sits on that golden throne at the end of the day." But then, a faithful young Captain Stephanus Austin said, "But Primarch, this goes against our code." And Angron said, "You know what, Stephanos? Come speak to our assembled masses and make your case." So good old Stephanos gets up on a platform surrounded by all sides by the World Eaters, and he says, "You all don't know how good we have it. I've been around the block, and I'll tell you what, the Emperor, he knows what's going down, so all we have to do is stay with him, and that's the bottom line." Stephanos turned to look at Angron, who immediately hit him with a glass pane, causing it to shatter on the man's bald head. As Stephanos staggered around in shock, Angron lifted the man high into the air, and falling backwards, he threw Stephanos through a mighty table. As Angron raised his hands to the adoration of the cheering World Eaters, Stephanos' longtime friend Dwayne rescued him. As he was leading him through the vents and corridors of the massive ship they were on, they spoke about how they needed to save mankind. The group separated from the World Eaters and started the Attitude Era, a gruff, hard-drinking, cuss-saying, and female-objectifying group of the toughest SOBs you'll ever meet. Just like their prior legion, they prefer melee combat, marching around the battlefields of the galaxy, clad only in power-armored speedos and tights. With an occasional dose of baby oil, these soldiers have foregone such incredible weapons as the chain sword and power sword, and instead swing ceramite chairs at their opponents, choosing to lift them off the ground and throw them down to their horrible defeat. Vowing never to forgive the evil Angron, they will once again be the World Eater champions. Their speedos are black with white, and the various company iconography is emblazoned on their butts. The only sign that they are coming is when you hear the sound of shattered glass, and they descend like roided madmen onto the battlefield. They will defeat Angron at World Eater Mania. Stephanos will take the throne from his father, and the quadrillions of soldiers will know who the best is. They will know a new world order has come about, and if Angron isn't down with that, then the Attitude Era has 2 words for him. Now hit my music. Okay, back to what we were doing. we are going to start with a successor chapter for Robot Girly Man's 13th Legion, the Ultramarines. Because of course we are. You guys voted that I did this one first, and so that's what I'm doing. Couldn't do something more interesting like literally anything else, but here we are. So, the 13th is known for being incredibly good at logistics and efficiency, which the Imperium was in dire need of. Rather, it was in Van Dire need of, right after the Reign of Blood. When Van Dire was finally finished, the Imperium had to detangle the Administorum and the Ecclesiarchy, and so in the 22nd founding, a new shining and glorious chapter was created for the purpose of auditing the planetary governments of the Imperium as well as making them more efficient. Shortly before the 22nd founding, the Ultramarines found themselves in a battle with chaos, where a brave sergeant organized an Imperial Guard regiment with such incredible efficiency that they only lost 5 million soldiers when they originally thought they would lose 8 million. With such an incredibly one-sided victory, the sergeant found himself the focus of the Administorum higher-ups. They approached the young sergeant and promoted him to found a chapter that would work on behalf of the new Administorum leadership to root out the horrible waste of Van Dire. The sergeant insisted that the members of his chapter should be driven by a desire to help the Imperium and not to be paid, to which the Administorum said, "What the heck are you talking about? Space Marines don't get paid." And he laughed and said, "Oh yeah, of course they don't." This man went on to found the chapter known as the Department of Imperium Efficiency, called DIE, or DIE for short, because he wants the wasteful practices of the Imperium to die. His name, Elanius Mascarium, with his second-in-command, Vivicarius, first set out to make the various companies of the DIE. The first company, which Mascarium himself would lead, was called PayPal. Then, the veteran-most members of the chapter would fill this company. The second, Solar City. The third, OpenAI, followed by XAI, the Boring Company, Neuralink, SpaceX, and finally Tesla. Mascarium decided that he would be even more efficient than other chapters of Space Marines and only have 8 companies. The chapter chose the color scheme of dark brown, almost black armor with red, white, and blue trim. The weapon of choice was, of course, the mighty Flamer, though most of their combat protocols focused on utilizing self-driving cars. As the chapter approached the first hive world that they were set to help seek proper efficiency, they saw incredible pushback from the higher-class members of society. Mascarium and the DIE found that the hive world was paying a proper 10% to the imperial tithe, but that of the remaining 90% of the GDP, the world had 88% being spent on the top 1% of the top 1%, and that the remaining 99.99% of people were left to feed on the scraps of 2% of the global domestic product. Elonius was distraught at what he had seen. He and Vivicarius quickly set out to have the various companies set up their stations of operation in different parts of the world to start destroying the government institution that funneled untold quadrillions of dollars towards their hyper-elite. After 58 years of non-stop work, the DIE had been able to work through a total of 3% of the administrative bloat, and Mascarium had had enough. He decided that he would just imprison all of the governing officials and start from scratch. Another 200 years after the imprisonment of all the corrupt officials in the world had seen only slightly better outcomes. Still, more than 80% of the GDP was going to keep the unimaginably complex infrastructure that mostly served the higher-ups up to date. Then, one faithful day, the orcs arrived. Mascarium, seeing their streamlined hierarchy, was enchanted. He and Vivicarius led the defense of the world. The population was reduced by 240 billion to only a measly 80 billion, which of course Mascarium knew would make it far more manageable. He set about a new system of government where teeth were currency and the biggest people were the ones in charge. And then they left. For 400 years, the DIE fought the orcs, learning, growing, and when they returned to their hive world, they found that the orc structure of government was actually more efficient than any human government working in the Imperium of the day. Muscarium declared that the world would forever be the home world of the DIE, and he renamed the planet Dark Mega. For the last few thousand years, the DIE have continued their endless fight towards greater imperial efficiency, having brought considerable improvement to 3 additional worlds, making their planetary efficiency and decorruption programs have an average rate of 1 planet per 900 years. A raging success by imperial standards. On their pauldron, they bear the mark of their chapter, a black X, and whenever someone is in their presence, they'll be quick to hear their chapter motto, "Make the Imperium great again." The 14th Legion, the Death Guard. When ugly, smelly, stinky old Mortarion, the perpetual loser and depressed kid that he was, decided to betray his own sons, a few of them made it out alive, and because they had such a visceral anti-Mortarion perspective, they decided that they were going to do things the exact opposite of him, and thus they founded the Lifeguards. The Lifeguards dedicated themselves to being hygienic, healthy, and hunky. They beefed up and decided that they would do whatever they could to save as many people as possible. Their chapter's home world, however, was an oceanic world, and as such, whenever it was attacked, many of the enemies of the Imperium would just blast the buildings and send tens of thousands of people into the water. So what the Lifeguards realized they had to do was save them all by jumping in after them and swimming to them to safety. Though, as one might expect, Space Marine armor isn't all that buoyant, so instead of wearing a full suit of armor, they just wear helmets, red board shorts, and flip-flops. Their most hated enemy, the Death Guard, doesn't even know they exist because these guys spend most of their summer just hanging around the chapter world named Puel. They have kind of forgone the use of weapons, but they are super resistant to flame-based weapons because of being in the sun all the time for hundreds of years into old age. Their skin is perfectly bronzed into a heat shield. They don't have a battle cry. Instead, when they do run into battle, they all simultaneously blow their whistles. The 15th Legion. The Thousand Sons under Magnus were just incredibly studious individuals. They pursued the depths of knowledge, research, study, and diligence, their scholarship unparalleled, and their knowledge unmatched. Unfortunately, while the Thousand Sons were choosing what arcane fields of study to invest their time in, some of them seemed to choose topics poorly. Specifically, there were several of them that spent their time getting low Gothic lit degrees, and let me tell you that it didn't go well for them after they graduated. They were basically useless to the Thousand Sons, so they all had to get jobs working at coffee shops. Now, mind you, working at a coffee shop in the far-flung dystopian future isn't that bad on its own. But if you are deeply entrenched in the halls of learning and you choose to utterly waste your time on getting a lit degree, then, well, this just seems to be what happens, I guess. Anyway, Magnus just kind of kicked these guys out before the whole heresy thing. These disconnected Thousand Sons rejects were super upset about this state of affairs. However, they mostly sat out of the war, and when the Second Founding came along, they decided that they were going to unionize and try and get some benefits out of it. They took green and white for their color scheme and used a siren as their chief chapter image. Their chapter motto is, "Can I get your name?" which they were super ashamed about. When they registered their chapter with the Administorum, they actually wrote down that it was a joke. They also happened to intentionally misspell the name of the chapter master, Brian. They spelled it Brain, again, as a joke. But when the chapter eventually realized that names held power over demons, they thought it was clever. Unfortunately, nobody else did. Continuing with the 16th Legion, who was originally the Sons of Horus. Well, originally, I guess they were the Lunar Wolves, but the Sons of Horus. During the Horus Heresy, a grave choice faced the newly created Space Marines of the 16th Legion. When their father turned away from the light of the Emperor, the youngest of the Space Marines came to believe that they could care for themselves better than their own dad, and so a brave battle brother gathered his comrades and approached the Imperium Supreme Court. Having not had anything to do for the last 200 years of crusade due to the fact that courts are mostly irrelevant when an authoritarian dictator is in charge, the court was perplexed as to why the group of several hundred Sons of Horus had approached them. However, thankfully, the sons of Horus brought the necessary paperwork, filed out in triplicate, and notarized. They sought legal emancipation from Horus. They decided to utilize the original sea green color and iconography of the sons of Horus. They didn't deny that Horus was their father, they just wanted to be able to make decisions for themselves. And so the courts properly filed the paperwork and sent it to the Administorum. Once the heresy had ended, Horus's soul had been ripped from existence, the witch hunts began. The differing factions within the Imperium started to search out every traitor marine, everyone even associated, because association is the worst kind of guilt in the Imperium. The legally emancipated sons of Horus were chased down by a force of blood angels looking for vengeance for their lost father. It was a hard-fought battle for several weeks. Legally emancipated sons of Horus found themselves in an underground bunker, only a few dozen left and waiting for death. But then, at the last moment, the Administorum clerk came to meet with the chapter master of the Blood Angels. He declared that there was nothing that could be done to the legally emancipated sons of Horus, because in seeking emancipation they had successfully removed their association to their father. Their emancipation took place just before Horus officially turned traitor, and being verified by the highest court in the galaxy made it an ironclad document. The Blood Angels withdrew, and the legally emancipated sons of Horus escaped with their lives. Over the millennia, they have rebuilt their chapter into a codex-compliant one. They favor the Bolter and Power Maul. Their chapter motto is, "Parents just don't understand," and their highest hope is that one day they'll be able to move in with their grandpa, Big E. The 17th Legion. The Emperor's witnesses go from planet to planet knocking on the doors of governors or kings or whatever on Saturday mornings. When the unsuspecting person briefly leaves their breakfast in order to answer the door, two incredibly polite people appear and they ask, "Hello, we're the Emperor's witnesses. Would you like to talk about our God and Emperor?" The witnesses try to force a conversation on the king, who really just wants to get back to his breakfast. They try and hand him special books that their old Primarch just made up on his own, but as soon as the king says, "I'm not sure about the credibility of this Lorgar character, he just wrote down all of this by himself. Who knows if this emperor even told him to do that? Where even is Lorgar these days?" The emperor's witnesses will just stick to the script, talking about family and stuff. When the conversation inevitably ends with the king telling the emperor's witnesses no thanks, they start walking away from the palace, talking about how funny it will be when the king dies and is eaten by chaos demons for all eternity because he didn't listen to them. The emperor's witnesses forgo the wearing of armor and instead wear black pants, a black tie, and a white short-sleeved shirt. However, every single one of them wears the helmet of a chaplain. They go around trying to get everyone to turn to their little sect. The Dark Templars even find the constant proselytizing quite annoying. They've even tried to tell custodians that they don't know the Emperor's will as well as the Emperor's witnesses do. However, for some reason, they are doing absolutely everything they can to stay away from Robot Girly Man and the Lion, though they claim it's just a coincidence that they're never in the same place at the same time. Every other chapter in the Imperium finds these guys incredibly annoying. The Ecclesiarchy has decidedly determined that they are not an officially sanctioned sect of the Imperial cult. They say that they don't use armor because the Emperor protects, but the real reason is that because the Mechanicum absolutely refuses to outfit them or train their tech marines, partially because the Emperor's witnesses don't think that anyone should train to be a tech marine because any minute now the Emperor's going to get off his throne and save everybody, and partially because the Mechanicus just thinks they're jerks. The only people in the entire galaxy that seem to have a somewhat positive opinion of them are the Tau, but that's just because they're polite. The Tau still think that the Emperor's witnesses are totally crazy, but they at least invite them to talk and try to win them over to the greater good. The 18th Legion. Long ago, the four Chaos Gods lived together in chaos. Then nothing changed, which Zeech was kind of upset about. However, several millennia after that, the Horus Heresy happened, and once that was finished, the good old salamanders were starting to grow in number, and they decided that the next time a founding came around, they were going to get another successor chapter. So what they did is they took all of their most insane pyromaniacs and put them together under a psyker chapter master that specialized in pyrokinesis. They called their chapter master the Fire Lord, and they called themselves the Fire Nation. Wearing black armor with red and orange highlights and trim, the Fire Nation stalks the stars in search for the Avatar of Cain, because they just really don't like how he is totally stealing their fire thing. Their favorite weapons are, of course, the hand flamer and flamer. They chase comets, hoping that every now and again they'll find one that's surpassing a human world that has fallen away from the Imperial over the millennia, and then they'll just suddenly attack. For some reason, they really like attacking people when there are comets in the sky. Their iconography is a dragon, and their chapter motto is, "Give me fuel, give me fire, give me that which I desire." The 19th Legion was never composed of what you would call social butterflies. In fact, they were downright weird, always hanging out in the corner, trying to be super edgy, wearing dark clothes. Sometime in millennia past, a chapter was made from this group called the Raven Guard that really leaned into this aesthetic hard. On the outer reaches of the galaxy, the newly founded chapter vowed that despite not being understood by their Primarch, that they would do it on their own. In a desire to just be left alone, they stuck to the edge of the Imperium, vowing only to recruit 14-year-old boys that lived in their parents' basements without any windows, listening to music all day and never smiling. And this decision has filled the ranks of the chapter. Furthermore, the fact that the recruits were essentially social outcasts that nobody wanted hanging around made the locals want the Space Marines to take them. This chapter's chapter master, who they have dubbed the Edgelord, is so over it that from time to time he even listens to music from Noise Marines. Not because he actually likes it, but just because he thinks it makes him complex. Every single Marine in the chapter is an aspiring artist. However, more than 98% of them play bass. They patrol their section of the galaxy, always searching for really good local bands and house shows. And it is every Marine's dream to be accepted into the first company where they can finally be able to play shows themselves instead of fighting aliens all day. Their chapter colors are black and somehow even darker black, and their chapter symbol is undecipherable because it's just black paint on a black background. Their chapter motto is, "I knew them before they were cool. They are the all-Imperial Rejects." And that brings us to our final, the 20th Legion, the Alpha Legion. Now, the Alpha Legion are tricky and secretive, guys. They are known as major spies, and this Loyalist chapter has wanted to carry on that tradition. However, once their Primarchs left the good graces of the Imperium, they grew just super unsettled and depressed about it all. They started feeling like everyone was just judging them, and they just stopped taking an active role. They ended up finding themselves ignored by almost all of the other Space Marines. They just had lost their value, it seemed. They had such little respect that even the Eldar started to not care about them. As time passed, the Orcs realized they were just boring to fight, so they faded into the background. People didn't ask their opinion, they just kind of hung around unwanted. But because they were such total nobodies to everyone in the galaxy, they were able to just sit in the corner quietly hearing all the plans that everybody was making, and they ended up becoming spies again. It took their chapter master over 100 years to actually get the courage up to suggest that they could help the Imperium by spying on its enemies. And of course the Imperium laughed in his face and rejected him, so he ended up writing letters anonymously giving information, always signing them "Your secret admirer." At first the Imperium ignored it, but eventually they thought, you know what, these letters seem to be right a lot, and they started paying attention to them. But every time the officials got a letter, they just kind of rolled their eyes and had to go with it. They're known as the beta males, and they probably have chapter colors or some kind of iconography, but no one really cares. If you ever see a Space Marine standing awkwardly in the corner, there's a pretty good chance it's one of them. If you ever talk to them, just don't ask them about their hobbies, because they'll just endlessly talk about them and how cute they think the Sisters of Silence are. Well, that does it for my video for today. You know, I am happy that I decided, thanks to you guys, to just do this as one long video. And yeah, let me know what you guys think of this kind of stuff. I do plan on going back to Star Wars stuff for my next few videos, but as I've said in this video earlier, I'm probably going to do one of these for Chaos Warband. I already have names for, I think, 19 of them. One of them maybe 2 of them I'm probably going to change. But yeah, might do that in another month or so. But mostly going back to Star Wars, unless for some reason this just totally takes off and I find myself with a massive influx of fans that want to have Space Marine-based comedy. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and all that garbage.